Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year to a new season, a new year, a new episode of Needs Some Introduction. Today, Sona and I will be discussing the seventh episode. We have three more episodes to go, Sona, of The Agency on Showtime, Paramount Plus. This episode's called Hard Landing. Are you out there, by the way?
I'm here.
Oh, okay. You were very quiet. I was afraid I lost the audio again.
No, I'm here.
So, Sona, did you watch anything during your break?
You know what? On New Year's Eve, we binge watched The English Teacher.
Oh, wow. What'd you
English
think?
Teacher, The English Teacher. I'm not sure if there's
I
a
forget.
the.
I think it's just English teacher. Yeah.
I think it is just English Teacher. We enjoyed it. It was a fun, quick thing to watch, and it was very entertaining. And then, of course, my husband, as he tends to do, started reading Wikipedia while we were watching. And it turns out there are some sorts of assault accusations against the main guy. And at that point, we were too far in. So I just finished it. But I didn't need the moral dilemma. I got to get him to stop doing that.
Oh, I had no idea about the moral dilemma. And this show, I think, is number 2 on all the critics list this year. And
it was good.
It's unfortunate that it's pretty funny. Like, I was putting together, I probably will still publish this, an end of year list. And there were so many movies this year that I haven't even been able to catch up on. So many movies that I don't think there were that many 5-star masterpieces this year. So maybe less of those. But there were so many films that maybe didn't even work, but they were interesting. Like, I thought this was an incredible year for movies, even the ones that didn't really work for me. And the reason I bring that all up, and maybe it's because of the writer's strike, although the writer's strike impacted movies as well, is that when I was putting together my top 10 list of TV shows, it was the most boring top 10 list. You could look at anyone's critics top 10 list, and I'm like, that's my top 10 too. Like Shogun, yep, that's in my top 10. Baby Reindeer, yep, that's in my top 10. English Teacher, yep, that's in my top 10 list. Like, there's no surprises. Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, definitely in my top 10, by the way. Not only are these like my top 10 lists, these are the only 10 shows worth watching this year. So I don't think there was that much there beyond the obvious. But yeah, unfortunate to hear that. I didn't know anything about that.
I didn't do a deep dive into it myself because really, I don't remember how many episodes there were. Say there were 10. He told me this at around episode 7. So it was kind of like, listen, we're already in at this point. Let's just finish it out. And it is what it is.
I think there was only 8 episodes, actually.
Okay, so maybe at around episode 6, he told me this. I am not here to judge the truthfulness of those claims. I have no idea what the outcome was. I don't know the validity of it. But generally, for good or for bad, that's the type of thing that if I know it beforehand, it will make me kind of just say, there's enough other stuff on my list. I'm just not going to bother with this. I'm not here for the moral dilemma. I just want to be entertained. But in this particular case, I was entertained. And there's also a moral dilemma.
Yes, I thought that was very, very funny show, actually.
Very funny. I agree.
It's rare that I will just watch something by myself and just bust out laughing. And that one made me laugh a lot.
Same.
And it's also been like universally, anytime I recommend that to somebody, like a month later, everybody's like, I saw that. It was so funny. So the ratings were pretty weak on that show, the Nielsen ratings. But I feel like, once again, everybody I've recommended this to has binged the whole show. So I have a feeling that between seasons, and it is coming back for another season, it's going to grow a lot. I saw a whole bunch of movies, Sona. I saw Nosferatu, which was fantastic. I didn't think I was going to like it. And I have liked all of this director's previous work. But everything I heard about the film, that it was pretty much the Nosferatu story exactly again. I rewatched the old Nosferatu films, even the original one from 100 years ago, in preparation to see it. And then when I heard that he really hadn't changed the plot at all, I'm like, okay, this is going to be just kind of redundant to what I've already seen. And I'm also a big fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1990, very much in line with that as well. There's a lot of practical effects and some cool visual sleight of hand that's kind of like old school, but very effective. So I thought it was going to be very much like a museum piece. And it definitely is. But it is so moody and enveloping. Like, within minutes, you are like in this world. And I just loved it. I just thought it was so lush and just really beautifully made. And I really enjoyed it. And I also saw Babygirl, by the way, a movie about kinky sex, basically. And I got to tell you, Nosferatu is way kinkier and maybe sexier than Babygirl was. I was pretty disappointed with Babygirl. Like, I mean, I was really intrigued by it. You know, we've talked about how psychological and erotic. This is not really a thriller, more a drama, psychological drama. Really very interested in seeing this, featuring, of course, your least favorite actress, Nicole Kidman. And Harris Dickinson, who did The Iron Claw last year, which was very good. And he was very good in it. And he also did A Murder at the End of the World, which we discussed here on the podcast. He was very good. The performances are very good. Antonio Banderas plays the cuckolded husband in this case. They have, it's interesting, they have a happy marriage. And this kind of reminds me, and maybe this would be interesting to you, Sona, in the way that Unfaithful is. It's about a happy marriage that is disrupted by an affair. And, so for all these reasons, I thought this was going to be really interesting. It takes place at Christmas. It's a psychological drama, which reminds you, of course, of Eyes Wide Shut, which also features Nicole Kidman. So almost it could be a way to be like a bookend to a part of her career. All of these things made me really interested in seeing it, and it just doesn't really do enough for me. So I was a little disappointed with that one. Your mileage may vary on it, but
Unfaithful is fantastic. Just on that subject.
I mean, of the two, Unfaithful is more obviously a erotic thriller, really like a throwback in some ways to another era. And it gives you the goods, not only the psychological aspects of what is driving this woman, which of course is really what Babygirl's interested in, more so than the thriller elements, but it gives you the kind of, for lack of a better term, cheap thrills that an erotic thriller will give you.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think Unfaithful is a really good film. I also saw Complete Unknown, which was, I was like, I'm not going to like this movie. I'm going to hate it. And I didn't. I really enjoyed it. But musical performances were really good. I got really caught up in this. I think the ending is terrible. Such a cliche of these biographical films. But up until the end, I thought it was really, really good. Timothée Chalamet does a really good job playing Dylan. Really impressed with most of it from a production standpoint. I got caught up in just some of the musical performances, like the moments, you kind of feel the optimism of the folk movement and, in the early 60s, those aspects of it work really well. Then when it kind of becomes more of a cliched biographical film as it goes on, it becomes a little kind of generic, as you would expect. There's so many movies that I think have great first halves, and Babygirl is one of those too. Not a great first half, but a good first half. And A Complete Unknown has a great first half, and then it kind of just, becomes a generic biopic. And another example of this, I also saw The Brutalist, the 3.5-hour movie with a 15-minute intermission in it.
Yikes.
Even the intermission works well. Like, it's such a confident film. The production is massive. It's only made for $10 million. So if you ever see this movie, it looks like it cost $100 million. It's like an immigrant story. The post-war era has some incredible performances. The first half of this movie, which literally it's cut right in half, the first half of the movie is, again, absolutely brilliant. And this movie might even win Best Picture this year. But for my opinion is that the second half is terrible. It looks great, still looks great. But like everything that is intriguing about this relationship between capital and creation or artistry in any way, which obviously is like a metaphor for not only this giant structure that this architect's trying to build, but also the making of a movie itself, and like how everything is compromised and how there is this toxic symbiosis between rich people who want the cultural clout of funding art, but then the artist who needs to be in this relationship, and how they manipulate in their own way. It's really interesting. It becomes like almost like a relationship drama in the way that these two things play with each other. Everything that's subtle about the first half of the film is so blunt in the second half. And I'm like, I got this all in the first half. Why are we doing this again? And in a much, much less interesting psychological way. Anyway, so I was disappointed with that, but it might end up winning all the awards this year because it feels like an important film. Oh, one more thing I want to bring up is I just saw this yesterday, actually, the film A Real Pain. Have you heard about this one?
I haven't.
This is Jesse Eisenberg wrote and directed this movie, and it stars Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg.
Wait, I think I have heard about it. Keep talking.
Kieran Culkin is probably going to win Best Supporting Actor this year. He's excellent in this, although it very much feels like the Roman Roy performance again. And they play these cousins whose grandmother has passed away. and they are going on a trip to Auschwitz together. A couple of things I was not expecting to see here. One is that their tour guide, when they get to Poland, is Will Sharp from The White Lotus season 2. Who's not Jewish. And he calls that out in the film, but he goes, but he is an expert at this. So he's taking them as a tour guide. So it's fun to see him. I wasn't expecting to see him in this movie. But more importantly, one of the people on this tour is the actor who plays Osman on The Agency. And
so interesting.
He's so good in it. And obviously very like such a gentle performance, like not at all the threatening character he plays in The Agency. So anyway, totally surprised again. I wasn't expecting to see him there, and I was like, oh, I was just watching this yesterday going, I'm gonna see him again tomorrow when we watch The Agency.
So funny.
And that was good. I think this would probably appeal to you, Sona. These two family members who had been very close when they were young, now reconnecting on this trip, and how they're frenemies to each other, how one is so different than the other one, and how that draws them to each other and then repels them from each other, and how they're just stuck on this trip together. And how that context of this trip itself and the history of this terrible time of the war, which also ties into The Brutalist, by the way. A lot of these things I watched somehow accidentally intersected with each other. Babygirl and Nosferatu ended up being a strange double feature, and The Brutalist and A Real Pain ended up being a strange double feature because they both deal with, honestly, the architecture of these concentration camps. I think you'd appreciate it even more than I did. And I liked it. It wasn't a grand slam for me, but definitely worth watching, and terrific performances from the two leads. All right. So let's get into this episode, Sona. This one's called Hard Landing. So this is the hard landing that Martian has mentioned he was heading towards. It didn't seem that hard yet. I think there's going to be a much harder aspect to this landing very soon. Sona, I did choose to listen to Love is Blindness again, and it did not irritate me as much.
So why is there not a skip button, though? That's what I was wondering.
I could skip it. I could skip it. I did. I mean,
you could manually fast forward it, but I didn't see a skip button. Was there one? Maybe.
No, there's a skip. There's a skip on the previously on, and there was a skip on this. As a matter of fact, I know that there was a skip on it because I said I did listen to it. I listened to half of it. And then
I just realized I was casting it, so that the skip button was probably on my phone.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'll be skipping that going forward.
I have been skipping it, but I did listen to most of it this time, and it didn't bother me as much. This was the first time that it's funny we had an opposite. Well, you've been skipping it. This was the first time that I watched it and thought, why am I doing this to myself? I should just skip it. I have not looked into it. I do wonder what people's general consensus on this song is. And I do say this as a fan of the performer in general. But boy, this one doesn't work for me. Just use the U2 version. The U2 version is very good. Maybe they couldn't get permission.
Licensing issue, I would imagine.
Exactly. Yeah. By the way, Sona, at the end of The Agency, they constantly try to play Landman.
I have not noticed the music at the end. That's interesting.
Oh, no, Landman, the TV show, the Billy Bob Thornton.
Oh,
does it autoplay?
No, I don't think I get that. Mm-mm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have seen the first 30 seconds of Landman like 25 times now.
I was going to have to ask you which band performs Landman next, so I'm happy you answered that for me.
No, I wanted to be clear on that. They should try to autoplay the Dexter show, which I have been watching. It is terrible, but I have been watching it.
I don't think it's terrible. I don't think it's must-see TV, but I don't think it's terrible. I'm entertained by it.
When I say it's terrible, I don't mean that watching it is terrible. And if you've never seen a Dexter show before, somehow, and you would be watching this, I can't believe that's true, that it would be a terrible experience. I meant the point if it was terrible. I think I came to that conclusion, which I was kind of trending towards anyway, in the last week's episode. I haven't seen the most current week's episode, but in last week's episode, I really just felt like, what are we doing here? The story of them as kids, it has no real consequence. And we're regurgitating his origin story yet again. I'm not talking about the performances being terrible. I'm not talking about the scripts being terrible. I just watched the show and I'm like, what is the point of this show? Other than just nostalgia play for the original Dexter show. I guess that's what's going on there.
I think it's adding dimension to the origin story.
Do we need more dimension, really? The more dimension I get, the less interested I am in this character, to be honest.
I do think the way they are developing Harry here is interesting. I've mentioned before in original version of Dexter, I had a lot of issues with decisions that Harry made.
Yes. Yes.
It seemed like all of this could have been avoided with a good therapist. I think they are doing a good job of developing the conflict that Harry experienced that was not really shown in the original version. And I think it's also a little bit entertaining how they're showing Dexter's learning curve of being a serial killer.
Yeah. I do agree with the Harry thing a little bit in the fact that I had a read of Harry in the original Dexter is that maybe he was a serial killer and he was trying to correct that in his son.
He seemed to just give in to these dark passenger impulses very quickly in the original version.
All right, maybe we'll save that conversation for that season when it ends, but it's watchable. And if you're a Dexter fan, what I would say is you'll probably find it watchable, minimally watchable. You may even find it enjoyable. For me, I just wonder why I'm watching. But I have been watching, so I mean, I guess that's why they keep making these shows.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I will say, speaking of autoplay, often after you finish that original version of Dexter autoplays,
right?
And
yes.
then it pales in comparison.
Oh my God. You don't want to put them side by side. That's for sure. But yes, last time I watched it, it did autoplay the first episode of Dexter, which I did not watch. But yeah, that's where it was going for sure. Okay, so let's kick off this episode. We are with Samia. She's at this conference. I called it a conference, but it's this negotiation, I guess, between the Chinese and the Sudanese, these rebels.
Yeah.
There's this threatening figure there. I guess he's been there before. We haven't spent too much time with him. But I do like the fact that he mentions, oh, I read your thesis paper on sexual violence against women. This is very threatening, by the way. And that he says, hey, not all men are bad. And then he immediately basically threatens her. So I find it like...
and her family.
Yeah, exactly.
Her sisters, her mother.
Not all men are monsters, but I am. She panics, once again, lending credence to, I think, more and more so that she is not an agent or a double agent, although she may be one by the end of this whole thing.
Right.
And she calls Martian right away. And Martian's wheels start to spin. And I got to tell you, he pretty cleverly gets out of this whole entire mess, at least for the moment. So we'll get into like his whole machination of revealing himself and covering his ass and bringing Samia and protecting her and his daughter and all these things all at the same time. Pretty cleverly trying to spin all these plates and successfully doing so, at least momentarily, although we know it's going to go badly at some point. Poppy is visiting her dad yet again. He wants her to stay inside. Poppy, I got to tell you, I understand, you're annoyed. Your dad shows up.
This is ridiculous.
Not only that she wants to go outside, which I can understand, but for her to be wandering around with her headphones in, it's just like, you got to at least be aware of what's going on around you. If you know there are people out there that potentially are looking to hurt you. Yeah.
I mean, there's the rebelliousness of being a teenager, and then there's like no sense of self-preservation. Because in the last episode, she really seemed to be shaken by her interaction with Osman, understood the gravity of the situation. And here, he's asking her to stay inside for one day, and she blows it off.
Yeah, she goes on campus immediately, even though he does tell her, she goes, am I in danger? Is everything okay? And he tells her she's fine. It's okay. I just need you to stay indoors. And to that point, if you believe she's some naive girl that she's just wandering around because daddy said everything's going to be okay. But she is so skeptical of him. And she's just like, I'm going to go outside. I don't care what you say. And then throws her beats on. And I'm like, what are you doing, lady? Like,
right. I literally was thinking during those scenes, well, you and I just had a discussion about how I hate having things in my ears. But even aside from that, I don't use headphones partly because I want to hear everything that's going on around me. And in the city, there's a lot going on around you, especially lately. You want to be very perceptive of strange noises. So the cluelessness of this did not seem aligned with her actions in the previous episode. Teenager self-righteousness aside.
Exactly. So back at the CIA offices, we get the rundown on this Valhalla program. So it turns out there is this mercenary, this really brutal Russian guy. He runs mercenary operations all over the world. This is the way for Russians to have their fingers in a lot of pies without blowing back directly on them, that the Russians are actually pulling the levers. But he is a mercenary, so they think he can still manipulate him, retrieve Coyote, which of course is their imperative. I mean, they said they had 5 days left to save this guy. This is at least a day later. So, I mean, the clock is really ticking on this whole situation. They describe this guy as, being completely brutal and surrounded by a bunch of Nazi goons. But Martian has a plan to infiltrate them, and he's going to bring Alexei in. Oh, poor Alexei, man. This guy.
Really?
They know they can take a beating, at least. They know that for sure. So
without peeing himself. That came up more times than I expected during this episode.
Yes, many, many times. Apparently, that's part of the cover.
Bladder control.
Well, that's his giveaway. That's his tell.
I know. His superior control of his bladder was his undoing.
Yes. They bring him in, and this is, once again, this guy, it's just like a punching bag here. I like how they give him an opportunity. They're like, hey, look, we can, give you protection. We can give you health insurance for your brother if he needs to have cancer treatment again. Or the alternative is we throw you to the wolves. He's like, don't pretend like I have an option here. Come on. Mm-hmm. They're literally going to reveal him as a CIA agent. It really does speak to the fact that, and I think the show is intentionally doing this, that, these CIA agents, maybe they believe that their overall goals are noble, but their tactics obviously are not. And it's questionable. We don't know how this is all going to shake out. It's questionable if they don't create more problems than they solve over the course of this investigation. Mm-hmm. So smartly, at least, Martian does ask his tail to keep an eye on Poppy because he knows that she might get herself into trouble. Martian finally has to come forward, seeing that his daughter's potentially in danger here, and that Samia, he just had that call with Samia. He finally comes to Henry, something he should have honestly done a little earlier if he wanted to see this properly. Henry's asking, well, why are these Chinese agents tracking your movements? And this is where he comes up with this whole story, which is a pretty good cover story. I got to say, it's pretty clean. He's like, I just ran into Samia. That's the one part that he just needs to square that one circle. And the rest of this all falls into place. He just ran into her. She is supposedly attending this conference. He did his own investigation, which he did. So he's like many truths and one giant lie, of course. His investigation revealed that she wasn't actually attending the conference. It turns out she's actually negotiating or being part of these negotiations that involve the Chinese. The Chinese have now started to snoop on him. They met only one time, Sona, right? They only met for dinner a few days later. That's all, just this one. Sure. Henry,
lunch.
Of course, notices,
it wasn't even dinner. It was lunch.
Right. Henry, of course, is backing him up here and completely knows this is BS. He met him at the hotel where they were together, right? So, and his solution here, and it does kind of cover all his bases, is I think she's an asset. We need to approach her and we need to bring her in as an agent. And that way she gets her protection. He explains why the Chinese are there. He allows them to keep monitoring Poppy's activity. So all of this is really nicely tied together.
Yes, but when was this plan brought into existence? The idea of her being an agent, that to me was surprising. Were you surprised by that?
Oh, I think it just happened right now. Like he literally just brings it up and says, I think she's valuable, because they're saying like, you need to cut ties. You need to, are we going to backfill your history? Like, how are we going to?
You think he came up with this on the spot?
Oh, no. I mean, I think he's been working on this potentially, because in the narration, he says he basically had one play that would get him out. And I think this is it. I don't think he came up with it in the moment. I think he is going to Henry with this plan in mind.
And how sincere do you think this plan is?
In what way? Do you mean that he
truly believes she should become an agent?
Oh, no. I think he might be in his mind thinking, well, it's not going to be a bad decision necessarily, that maybe she has skills. I mean, she does have some level of skills here, obviously, in being able to be duplicitous for sure. So maybe he does think that she has some of the required skills here. But
I mean, what happens at the end of this episode leads us to believe, and we could be wrong, that leads me to believe that she had no idea there was anything weird about him. And
Right.
if that's the case, she should not be an agent.
I mean, people do selectively see people, especially if they have they're vested in the relationship.
She's involved in an international political uprising right now, and she wasn't able to tell something was weird about her boyfriend.
It's she's blind in that one regard.
Love is blindness.
Love is blindness.
I don't know. So anyway, I guess I was a little bit taken aback by this plan for numerous reasons, including that, if you really are in love with somebody, why would you try to draw them further into this mess? But okay, yes, it's logistically somewhat sound.
The reason I think on his part that he wants to draw her in even further is because it's the only way out for him in this way. You might be right that in some ways he might be putting her in further danger. But I think based on the conversation she had with him, A, she feels like she's in danger. B, he feels like
True.
he and Poppy are in danger and he needs protection. And of course, just from the perspective of his job, there are obviously very important things happening right now. And this has become a huge distraction. And it's definitely going to blow back on him at some point, right? So in this way, he gets to reveal himself. He gets to protect Poppy. He gets to potentially protect Samia. I just think that he thinks that this is just the only option to tie these things together. It may not work out, but I mean, he's been gambling this whole time, right? So this is just his next gamble. I do think this is much sturdier than what he's been doing so far, which just looked like it was headed towards disaster. And it may still be.
I suppose so. I guess I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of how you treat the person that theoretically you're so in love with.
I agree with all that. I'm just thinking that imagine that the Chinese discover Osmond that first of all, they almost captured the daughter this week. And that was obviously a threat. That was a very cool scene, by the way that she was, intercepted by that tail and hidden away the deli. That was all very cool, the way that was all done. And she had, obviously scouted out the exit through the back and everything. So given the role these people play, where they are operatives within the city, I'm sure that they know safe ways to get from one place to the other that obviously allow for quick getaways. So that was all very cool, the way that was done. But all that's to say that the Chinese are not relenting. Osmond threatened him directly, says, I'm very close, aren't I, to discovering who you really are. I mean, imagine that he just found out and then the CIA is like, who's this guy who's snooping around? Or the Chinese government is asking questions about Paul, your previous identity, and they just get it on the chatter from the Chinese desk. All of this is going to look horrible on him. So he has to make it look like, no, I was doing an investigation. I'm bringing you in. I just found out about this. So I think it's the only way the only play he had.
Professionally, it all makes sense. My question was more the emotional side of it.
Yeah, but I mean, he might also think that if she's locked inside that hotel and she can't leave and he can't get in there, he can't protect her either, right? So if things go bad.
True.
I don't think it's ideal. I think he's endangered her, but then again, she's there under some pretenses as well.
Yeah. And if his intention is not for her to really, in the end, become an agent, that's professionally going to be worse for him. So I don't know. I just have questions.
Yeah. I mean, I honestly think that he's thinking, even if she doesn't become an agent, but he brings her in and then they vet her and it doesn't work out, and they give her some identity or they get her back home safely. However that plays out, it's better than the current circumstance. I think it's basically his calculation.
For her, maybe not for him, but yeah.
Yeah. He's a gambler. I think he'll come up with another way out, or he has that level of confidence, I would say. Because he has multiple times here in narration brought up the fact that he might have been doing setting himself for disaster, but he couldn't stop. He was just falling and falling. Fair. I think he's used to that probably in his line of work. But of course, people are suspicious of him, primarily Dr. Blake.
I love this. I love everything about this.
I love when she's talking to Naomi going, well, why?
In the bathroom. Amazing.
Well, the scene in the bathroom, but there's multiple scenes. Even before in Henry's office, she says, well, is this normal? He ran into her. And does this happen that frequently? Why is it why were we not aware of this? And they go, well, he's a really good agent. So we give him a long leash. And she's like, should we give him such a long leash?
Yes.
I like the fact that she susses out immediately that Naomi has feelings for him, something we knew before.
Yes. which you called from the first episode as well.
Yeah, I couldn't read that scene, but I think it's become pretty clear, something I don't think we brought up in the previous conversations, where Henry, I think, said to Naomi, had she thought that things were going to be different now between them now that he was in London, like that maybe she had been, he was aware that she had feelings for him. Basically.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too, that given the fact that she has feelings for him, that she's still protecting him, because that protection is actually bringing Samia closer to him, which potentially, you know, for a romantic standpoint, is not helping her out. That actress who plays Dr. Blake has that look, that mischievous look. And I love when she's just reading the room and she's like,
Yep.
You could see it all on her face. That's perfect casting for this type of role.
But also, maybe I'm a little skeptical about things this episode. What was she doing in that meeting? Was that really a place for her?
I agree with the skepticism that you have there. She had mentioned when they brought her on that she was there just to observe, I guess, like to report back on doing exactly what she's doing now, to snoop out these potential weaknesses and issues within the dynamic of the team. But it does seem weird that, for example, some of the planning for the mission in Ukraine, she obviously was not in those meetings, but it seems like this is a pretty high level meeting.
Right.
It's the later meeting that I'm more skeptical of. The initial meeting where he comes in to talk to Henry, it's almost like he's there to have an HR conversation with Henry. So it makes sense to bring her in as someone who is observing, because he's trying to make the pitch that this is part of the mission. And they're like, are you sure this isn't an interpersonal issue? Which of course makes sense for her to be there. It's more the later meeting when they're in their war room. And I'm like, what is she doing there? Like, aren't they planning an operation? Why is she in this meeting? Right. And she's been in some of those meetings before too. So it's interesting where she's not allowed to be there. And so, like when Boss goes around, she's not there. But in the other meetings, she just shows up. I do agree. I don't think they would give her that much access.
Right.
Oh, and let's talk about that scene later on as well between Dr. Blake and Naomi in the bathroom.
Amazing.
Was it the way that Naomi reacts?
I mean, she was so bad at playing it off, first of all. So
this is why she's
bad.
not a field agent, by the way. Just the same reason that Owen shouldn't be a field agent.
Yeah. And I just loved the doctor's mannerisms and the way she was trying to, it felt like she was trying to break it to her gently, kind of. Yeah. And, you know, Naomi is being willfully obtuse about it. And she's kind of trying to find the line of how far she should push before like just grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her, being like, don't you see what's going on here? He's in love with her. She's in love with him. And you're in love with him. There's a problem. Right. I enjoyed the whole undercurrent of the conversation.
Honestly, I got to say that I wasn't 100% certain on whether I should believe that Martian is actually in love with Samia. I know we're supposed to believe it. I haven't really seen it so much in the show like we discussed last week, and maybe because they don't get to spend that much time together. Now that Dr. Blake has read it on his face or whatever, I guess that's proof positive that we're supposed to read it that way. My favorite part of this whole conversation, by the way, is when Dr. Blake goes, this is his job. He makes everyone fall in love with him.
I thought that was so interesting.
And Naomi goes, then why did he never do it to me? Ouch. The only person he's never made a move on.
I don't know. What I thought in that moment was like, well, there's a fine line between being charismatic and trying to make people fall in love with you, right? Like, isn't that kind of what charisma is, right? Making people interested in talking to you and fascinated by you. And then in return, they're going to give you some extra leeway. They're going to do you some favors. Aren't a lot of people getting by in life by using that trait?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
it's not the crazy thing that it seems like it is in the conversation. That's what I'm saying, right? I don't think it's that unusual to go through life, quote unquote, making people fall in love with you.
Well, I don't think that she is saying that this is such an odd trait that he has. I think what she's trying to do is open Naomi's eyes to it, right? I think Naomi is being a little, naive. And I think that's what she's trying to do. That you're taking him at face value because you want to believe, because love is blind.
There you have it.
Yet again. Anyway, all these interactions are very clever. I thought really well done.
I loved everything. And then the video, though, that Naomi watches after because, clearly the doctor has gotten inside her head now, right?
Yeah.
And she's
Yeah.
rewinding that part of the video where he says if it were possible, he would want
Right.
Samia to leave her husband for him. What a crazy thing to admit. I mean, I know you're supposed to be honest with your handler, but that to me seemed insane to admit you feel that way.
And if he wasn't in the game anymore, right? He's basically saying if I could leave the CIA, that he would want to be with her. So quite a thing to reveal.
Very honest. I mean, you would think that would be bad for your career development. I don't know. To admit that you're thinking about things in those terms.
I don't know if this is a mistake on the show's part or if they're trying to tell us something here. That version of him in that recording seems so much more open. And maybe this is why Naomi fell in love with him. I feel like we have not seen this version of the character at all. He is so calculating. Basically, every time he's on screen, he is lying to somebody. But more than that, it's just like in his face, he is hardened like steel. And in that conversation, he seems like he is just having a conversation with her honestly, openly.
Right.
Once again, maybe this is why she fell in love with him, because even though she's being warned of his manipulation potentially here, and obviously that he's hiding something, she probably did see an honest version of him. Once again, is this a mistake on the writer's part or is this sincere? Also, he's been away for 6 years. Was this conversation 4 years ago? He might have been a very different version of himself, when he wasn't on that period of time. So maybe that is something they're telling us about him. But yeah, I mean, like, it's an interesting way to read it, whether it's intentional or not. You cannot imagine that guy ever telling you the version of the character we know so far. I can't imagine him ever like sitting down honestly and telling you how he feels about something and getting a straight answer out of him, basically. That's how Poppy feels, by the way, too, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Danny. I think this is interesting as a follow-up to this conversation about Naomi's revelation that maybe she's in too deep or maybe she trusted too much. And the conversation she had with Danny last week, where she's saying to her, are you really in love? Are these feelings for real? And the reason I mention all this is we've seen parallels before between Danny and Martian for sure. And we see it here again in her ruthlessness. But not only that, in the fact that does she have real feelings for this other agent, Edward? Or is this all part of her manipulation because she knows she can use this as an angle? Or is she not sure? Because that's maybe the clearest read on Martian, that at different times he doesn't know, is he in love with Samia and is she an asset to him? Like maybe that has become blurred in his own mind. And Danny is going down the same rabbit hole potentially, where turns out that this brown-nosing guy who takes Reza to squash or has played squash with him every single day to monopolize his time is the one who's going to Iran with him. And then Danny brings in Edward, her torturer / lover, to threaten him away from this position. And by the way, I think this actor's doing such a great job. We haven't brought him up before. Everybody here, performance-wise, is so strong in this show, even in this bit part. I think we've all known someone who's like this, who on the surface makes everybody like him. He's just like this exuberant puppy dog, always so happy, at the same time conniving. He's always in a great mood, always so happy, always such a, I brought donuts for everybody today type of guy, as long as he's getting his way. And then when he doesn't get his way, he could be like really manipulative and doesn't even see their own personality that way. Don't even read themselves that way. He is just like, hey, guess what? I'm going to Iran. And she's like, no, you're not. So she gets this guy to threaten him once. It doesn't scare him off. But when he suddenly calls up on plan B, as it is, calls up on his wife's phone, he starts taking this way more seriously. And that doesn't guarantee that she's actually going to be the one who goes to Iran. But it does at least get him off the top of the list.
Honestly, the first conversation by the bicycles would have done it for me, assuming you're really an academic who just has an interest in these things. I would be very shaken by somebody threatening me like that. That probably would have been enough.
The thing that I think is most preposterous here, if I'm going to nitpick, when they threatened his wife, minimally, he could have been like, and don't tell anybody about this. Because after he gets shaken off the first time, I would go to Reza and be like, this guy approached me. I don't know what's going on. Because you may be, once again, if you're just on the up and up, you might want to let him know, like, there's somebody, I don't know if this is an agent or someone, but someone's threatening my life. And maybe you're in danger. Like maybe my proximity to you is what puts me in danger. So you might just want to warn somebody about this, right? As opposed to, like I said, that it would make more sense that if they went straight for the wife and it was like, and you keep your mouth shut, then I'd be like, okay, well, I don't know if it's really worth talking at this point.
Right.
So I find that a little skeptical that he wouldn't have told somebody something. So the plan to get Samia, or to at least have the first meeting with Samia and eventually, I guess, convert her to an agent, would be to pull her visa because she has not been attending this conference, which is legit. So that's a good cover. And they have the person who's running, or whatever, the head of this university or the conference, call her into the offices. Osmond is very suspicious of this, of course, goes with her, but it all seems to work out before they, have this meeting with her at the university and try to recruit her, which I guess is the cliffhanger for next week. Mm-hmm. We got a couple other things to talk about. One is just to finish things up with Poppy and Dad. She goes to visit him at the apartment again. And I was waiting. What African psychedelic rock band is he going to play? No, he played Dire Straits. So the very much more conventional soundtrack today. I am tuned into these things, though, especially because of those first two. I'm like, ooh, what? By the way, those are like on my Spotify playlist now. So I'm like, ooh, what new psychedelic African 70s band am I going to discover? Oh, man, just Dire Straits.
Just Dire Straits.
In Fassbender's performance, other than that conversation we see where he seems to be much more honest, and maybe that's what Naomi was looking at in his face, the only other tenderness we see here, until maybe the very end of this episode, by the way, the only other tenderness we've ever seen is with him and his daughter. And I thought that scene with Poppy was great. I like their communication. She shows up. She immediately starts berating him. He's like, nope, no talking here. They go out onto the patio, and then his face just kind of breaks there when she's, obviously very upset about the way this situation's been going.
She had a great joke here about the Chinese food.
Oh my God, what a great joke. I love this. The Chinese is here. And she goes, oh, the Chinese or the Chinese? I love it. Great joke. I saw it coming a mile away, by the way, and it still made me laugh out loud.
I didn't.
As soon as he said the Chinese are here, I'm like, oh, I see the joke coming. And I still laughed when she said it. It's a great joke.
I'm laughing at it again all over again. It was so good.
What did you think about that conversation, though, when he's telling her? It's interesting. Once again, I think this is maybe thematically what is happening. If you want to think about thematics at an episode level, I think that's kind of what's being explored here, is when the sincere emotion is part of the manipulation, right? And you see that, because in my notes, I wrote how much of this conversation he has with her is sincere and how much of it is him using it as a manipulation. And is there a difference, right? And I think, again, we'll circle back to it when we get to the end. But Dani, with her boyfriend and the conversation she had with Naomi, where she's saying, I'm allowing myself to have these emotions because I'm going to use them. But then can you really be that calculating when you're talking about your emotions, right? And I think that is maybe part of what's being explored here.
Yeah. And I think also related, the idea of seeing people as assets and what they can do for you and how you can use them to your benefit, right? Can you ever really turn that off?
It made me think about that even when he's talking to his daughter and he's trying to placate her, and he's obviously trying to rebuild this relationship with her. And then now she's become part of this game that he's playing, right?
And the stress it's putting on her, right? I mean, the poor girl is crying, saying she didn't know if she lied well enough.
Right. I know. It's really heartbreaking. What did you think about that scene earlier on where he brings her into this whole thing where they want to debrief her about her experience with the Chinese agent, and they're just making it sound like, oh, we just want to hear some questions. But he knows they're going to ask questions about his cover story. Again, he's smart about this. I guess an agent has to be, where he only needs one little lie. Everything else could be exactly the same. He only needs her to say, we met at that museum. And of course, she can talk about the trip to the museum because they did go on the trip to the museum. It only has to be one little lie. But I like the fact that he hugs her, tells her, we met Samia at blah, 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 blah. And then he releases her from the hug and he goes, do you need another hug?
Yes. And I was thinking, I would say, yes, I do. Like, let's
Exactly.
review that one more time.
Exactly. That's basically what he's telling her. Like, do you need to hear that one more time? You got it? But it's very funny that he's handling his own daughter here at this point. So
yes,
that was just another one of these layers of these manipulations that are going on here. Very subtly, though, which, of course, that's what they're trained to do. All right. So one more very important thing we have to talk about here. So this psychopathic general, General Volchek, they're throwing this poor guy, throwing Alexei into the middle of this. They've created some cover story that he wants to meet with him. We only discover this over the course of the conversation. The company he works for, the fuel company he works for, has been overcharging him for, this may not even be a cover story, it might be legitimately true, but using it as an excuse to meet with Volchek.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded kind of like a car rental situation where they gouge you for gas and
right.
you don't refill it. Couldn't quite grasp exactly the nature of how he was being undercharged. Seemed to have something to do with fuel, but yes.
Yeah, it looks like they just, every time they fill the gas tanks or provide the fuel, they just charge them 25% more.
Yeah.
Which turns out to be hundreds of thousands of dollars, which I guess wouldn't matter that much to these people. I guess unless, Alexei is using the cover that I was afraid you're going to find out and come after us because you guys are so brutal. By the way, Volchek has seen Apocalypse Now way too many times and said to get his head shaved here.
As someone who has Apocalypse Now playing in her home at an alarming rate, I actually avoid it every single time. So I don't know what you're referring to, but I take your word for it. I also had a question, again, about how money works in this world, right? Because we were talking about it in connection with Bosco and his payment to secure, right? The person, like, is $50,000 really that much? And then I was thinking, I think $300,000 was an amount that was thrown around. Is that much? It could be that much. I guess it's expensive to finance a war. I wasn't sure.
With the currency deflation, the ruble, it probably is a substantial amount of money in Russia right now. But I mean, still doesn't seem like the kind of thing that would matter to someone who's potentially running mercenary operations all over the world.
But you make a good point. The idea of being found out that you are defrauding somebody that could kill you is terrifying. So that works.
There is a great moment here, which is completely unnecessary, but I like when you have these little details. So I wanted to call it out, which is after he gets the gun put to the back of his head and Alexei keeps his composure, doesn't wet himself, very important.
Yes.
But I love the scene where they drop him off and he sits on the bench after they drive away. He like laughs and cries at the same time. And then he lets out this giant sigh. And I just love that as a character detail. It says so much about this guy, right? Who, once again, we've seen that these people are gamblers by nature, that there is probably some thrill, some rush to having pulled it off yet again. And I guess that's probably part of the draw of these people to these type of jobs. But of course, it's very dangerous. Do you really want to put the security of a nation in the hands of people who are there for the thrill of it?
Right.
So that's obviously very questionable. But I love this little moment here. It really tells you something about these people in general and this character specifically.
Honestly, the peeing also, I know I keep coming back to this, as well tells me something, because even before it was brought up in that scene, when they put the gun to the back of his head, I expected him to pee himself.
Right.
I think, that from my watching of movies and other TV shows and whatever, I fully expected him to urinate on himself. So I thought it was interesting that they made a point then that he hadn't. I think, yes, we learned a lot about this character beyond what we had, which was, him being very stressed out about what was going to happen and just kind of spiraling. So I think they added a lot of dimension in this episode.
Sometimes spending a lot of time with or getting additional psychological insight into a secondary character means they're not long for this world.
Yes.
Exactly. So it's possible we don't see him much longer. It is interesting because he is suspicious of him. He says, I think that we may have had a visit from our American friends. But to your point, the gun to the back of the head is maybe part of this whole test, right? All of this is part of the test.
I loved the line, he should have been pretending to be brave, but in fact, he was pretending to be scared. It wasn't exactly that, but I thought that was a great summary of what's going through his head.
Yeah, and this guy, theoretically, I mean, should be good at his job. This is the type of thing, knowing which one of your men is loyal to you and which ones are playing a game on you. And knowing that, of course, being an international mercenary, there's probably attempts to infiltrate by outside agents all the time. So, but in a way, and maybe this is the agency's bigger play as well, he might bring him into the fold anyway, because he wants to know, well, if someone's looking at us, why are they looking at us, right? So he might want to know more.
Keep your enemies closer, kind of thing.
Exactly. Speaking of Apocalypse Now, you apparently The Godfather's still in rotation in your house as well.
Oh my gosh, so much. That and Full Metal Jacket as well is up there. It's rough here.
Speaking of good half movies, the first half of that movie is pretty. It is rough though. It sounds like there's a lot of gunfire in that house. Yes. They do get a debrief from Alexei. It's funny, for some reason, as soon as I saw the secretary, I'm like, she's gonna be pivotal to this plot.
I agree. They gave a couple of extra seconds of screen time or something with the secretary that also called my attention to her in that way.
And of course, that was intentional, because then they're like, she's the one we're going to go after. Now, the fact that she's there, very importantly, that he mentions there's a secretary on the outside, then this was the one that's in the room. So they're like, okay, she's the one who knows everything. So if we can pressure her, then they probably don't need to get any military person involved, like one of these much harder to break people, because she's in the room when it's all happening, right? Just like Hamilton.
You really threw that one in there. Okay.
It's the room where it happens. I don't know. It just came out. It just came in my head. Just happened. All connected.
We're all over the place. Apocalypse Now.
Yes. Every cultural reference we can come up with. And then we get to the very end. Samia is all in blue today.
Oh, she had a fantastic outfit earlier in the episode. It actually had a print on it, which is unusual for her to wear a print. So it really drew my attention.
I've been paying attention to these monochrome outfits now that you brought it up every time.
I think they don't take up much space in her luggage. This is actually something I thought about this episode. They seem like they would pack very flat. So I guess she would have room for all of them.
She's got dozens of them. I think she's wearing, I don't think she's repeated.
She checked a bag. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
It wasn't a carry-on situation.
She arrives at the university. Grandma and Grandpa are here, the agents. And she gets into the elevator. The tail, I don't even know this agent's name, the one who, she has a lot of screen time this episode, by the way, between extricating Poppy from her situation and then being in the elevator, they're scanning her, making sure that she has no listening devices on her.
Yeah, that was an interesting little device. I haven't seen that before in movies or television shows.
I mean, I've seen it when they are scanning a room, right? Because you're looking for anything that's transmitting a radio signal that might be hidden. Although he's able to spot those. It's interesting when he goes and sweeps his own apartment when the first day he's there in episode 1 or 2, that is really just looking with his eyes. But you can use a little receiver too. In the olden days, that's what you would do. You would look to find any kind of suspicious radio transmissions, and you'd have a little device that's looking for them. You can get those, by the way. People, I don't know if you ever read those articles, but they're like, if you're suspicious that you're being spied on at your Airbnb, make sure you use this device. You can get those things.
I feel like usually in pop culture, they use it as an excuse to make somebody strip down or get felt up.
Yeah. In The Godfather, they do that. And then enters that room. Osmond escorts her all the way there, of course. The head of the conference or university, she starts to apologize. I like the fact that she tells Osmond that I've been listening. I've been getting the notes from one of the other students. I've been listening in on the virtual conferences. By the way, these conferences usually have recordings and things as well. So it's probably true that she could just watch from her hotel.
I was wondering if it was true or not.
I mean, she could just be lying, but she doesn't know that there's a play going on here. I don't think I don't think so. I mean, Martian has obviously not communicated this to her. I
agree. I just wasn't sure if she was trying to placate Osmond. I can't figure her out. I guess is what it's coming down to. Is it just all at face value? Is there more going on than we're being shown? And I think I want there to be more going on than we're being shown. I don't like it as much if it's all at face value, but I guess I need to start admitting to myself that maybe I need to take it all at face value.
Yeah, this is a little bit of the, if you go with the film noir idea, this is like the femme fatale that's a little in over her head. They don't give her much more dimension beyond that.
I think that's where maybe I'm struggling, is that I want there to be more to the character than there has been so far. So I'm trying to force it.
And maybe we'll get that now because they can have an honest conversation finally, because he walks in through the other door and she says, Paul. And great acting, by the way, great face acting here. The way his face falls, basically, and he just shakes his head no. Then,
it was a great cliffhanger, I thought. I was dying to know what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
What was going to be said next, rather. I have an idea what's happening, but I wanted to know the words that he was going to use.
This conversation is going to be really complicated, not only because he's going to have to tell her something, and obviously you can't spend 2 hours in there having a conversation about all the questions she's going to have that she should have had before, honestly, but now they must be asked. So not only that, but it's the fact that, they're going to have to talk to her about like recruiting her, but then they don't want to overwhelm her because she's going to have to walk back out that door and then keep a cover and all this. And what are the logistics of extracting her from this whole entire thing? That is going to be a really, really interesting conversation to pull off next week. I mean, for him to pull off, but also for the show to make believable, to be honest with you. So it will be a bit of a challenge. Where are you with the show right now? How are you still engaged?
For sure. I'm really enjoying it. I find it interesting. I like the storylines. I'm still waiting on that brother-in-law.
Yes.
But all of it is good except the one thing that I just talked about. I'm kind of struggling with the Samia character. I don't have a good grasp on what's going on with her. And that's one thing if it's purposeful. But if it's not purposeful, then it's poor character development.
Yes. Right.
What do you think?
I'm in the exact same place. I'm really interested in the show. I think they've done a good job. They definitely want this to run for multiple years. They want their own, people have said this before, but they want their own version of Slow Horses, which is now starting its 5th season. This is based on a series that ran for 5 years. So I'm sure when they decided on this adaptation, they wanted this to be a long-running series. And I think they've done a really good job of intriguing me about all these different characters. I want to spend more time in this office getting to know these other characters, even if the story isn't as centered on Martian. As a matter of fact, to your point, I think the Martian relationship with Samia is really the least compelling part of this whole thing at this point. I mean, she's central to some part of the mystery here, but it's not the thing that compels me the most in the series. And that's a double-edged sword, right? Like on the one hand, I think they've done a really good job of setting things up, but this central conceit for this whole season, I mean, it really is like the opening moments of this whole entire show is their relationship and whether she is an agent or not. And in a way, that's kind of interesting too, to think about how interesting, not necessarily in a positive way, but just kind of the decisions that were made there, because the very final moments of episode 1 with the screeching Love is Blindness song on the soundtrack is that he doesn't know whether he should trust her or not. And at this point, the mysteries become pretty clear that she's in danger and it's not of her. I mean, well, she's made decisions, obviously. She's in over her head, basically. So it's like, in a way, that mystery, which supposedly was central to the season, is not really there anymore. There's all these other things going on, obviously.
But I think also, if the love story were more believable,
yes, exactly,
that would feel more high stakes to us. That they are so in love with each other and she's in danger and what's going to happen.
Right.
But I think because the love story is, you tell me they're in love. Okay, they're in love. But I'm not feeling it on an emotional level.
Yes.
So it's hard to be invested in it other than, well, I hope you don't really screw up this poor lady's life, or have her end up dead because she fell in love with you.
Right.
But I mean, I would feel that for anybody. So
that's what I meant, where it is possibly detrimental that they've done a good job of making me interested. I want to know more about Henry. I want to know more about Naomi. I want another season where the relationship between Naomi and Martian might develop, or that she gets compromised by her emotions for him. I want to see Martian hang out with his daughter more, right? So that's why I was saying that on the one hand, I think they've done a really good job of setting the table for this show to run for multiple seasons, which they don't always do, by the way, especially with Showtime series. But I guess because they had a template of the first, the French series. I think they've done a good job there. But to your point, honestly, I think about what happens if Samia is in deep danger, is either kidnapped or is murdered by the end of this season of show. It should be like devastating, right? That he loved her deeply, that he allowed himself to be in love for the first time potentially in his life, and that because of his actions, this horrible thing happened. Logically, I can understand that it would be devastating to the character, right? Like I would feel bad for him because the character obviously is going through something horrible. But like you said, I don't feel it. It's not like I'm scared. Oh my God, something's going to happen to Samia. I'm just not vested there. And that's a limitation of the show, I think. But in general, I think everything else is working really well. And I'm very curious to see how they, as you mentioned last week, how they're going to tie together these different plot threads.
Yeah. I mean, in comparison, and this is a very dated comparison, but just thinking about spy shows, right? In Homeland, I don't know if you watched all the seasons of that. All of the romantic relationships there were very intense, and you really felt the investment of emotions on behalf of the characters. And it really heightened the tension of watching each episode, not knowing what was going to happen. Whereas here, it is more like, okay, I'm accepting it because you told me it's so, but that's it.
I agree with you, by the way. But I also think that there's kind of a difference in the story that they're telling in Homeland, where in that case, you have someone who's investigating somebody who they suspect is a monster and then falls for them. And then, of course, that is the type of thing that you're like, oh my God, don't let that happen. You know, like you were.
No, but with Quinn as well in the later seasons.
Well, I barely remember that actually. Yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was it felt very high stakes with Quinn at the end. And Quinn was also a fantastic character.
Yes.
So,
that's a different aspect.
So it's a high bar there. And Homeland was not a perfect show. There was a lot going on that, as you know, I didn't care for. So,
I didn't. Yeah. And I didn't make it to the end of that show either, which ran for, was that 8 years? It's an insane amount of time. This is a problem I have with Showtime shows.
Too long. Yeah.
None of these Showtime shows just all run way too long. So
it did redeem itself at the end. The final season was very good.
I don't even remember if I saw it or not. I think I did watch it because you recommended it so highly.
I only watched it because a mutual friend of ours said, I know you stopped watching it, but really watch the final season. It's very good. And I agreed.
But in general, I have an aversion to Showtime shows because Dexter's a perfect example of this, of course. The Affair also.
Oh my gosh, that one season
and I never made it to the end because of that.
Also
season. Very
strong final season, although slightly strange, of The Affair.
I've also not seen like Weeds. People say that show goes off the rails at some point.
That one hung on too long for sure.
Shameless is a show that I loved first season of that, and that's just
far too long.
Quit on that way too. I just couldn't watch that after like a couple of seasons.
No, totally agree. And on the subject of Weeds, that for some reason was on the other day. I think it must have auto-played after something that we watched. Maybe
after
Dexter.
Apocalypse Now.
I think it might have been Dexter, actually. But very funny to watch Weeds in the context of today's society and what we have accepted about recreational marijuana use.
Right.
It's very hard to understand the seriousness in which they're talking about marijuana.
Well, it was not that long ago, right? When many people were, this, obviously, people arrested for marijuana possession and dealing. Not that long ago.
Now it's the unofficial smell of the city of New York.
That's right. It smells better than urine usually. The urine usually smells on the streets.
So we have talked about urine more times in this single.
I was just thinking about that. That's the real smell of New York. In the summer?
In the summer, it can be, but I really think pot has overtaken it. It covers it.
Well, it's exactly. That's the reason they legalized it in the first place, just to mask the urine smell.
Yeah, it's great when you're at the playground.
Exactly. The kids are all getting contact highs.
I mean, there are so many times I've been at the playground and thought, has a parent just hit their limit? Because I get that. Or is someone coming in here to smoke? What's happening?
The parents might all just be smoking. They have their vapes, though. The
it's possible. Smell.
The vapes don't have that aroma, though. On that note.
On that note.
All right. So we have 3 more episodes of The Agency the following 3 Fridays. 2 Fridays from now, of course, we have Severance coming back. Have you rewatched any of the show yet, Sona? A chance?
I haven't, but I really need to between now and 2 weeks.
You got 2 weeks, Sona. If you watch 1 episode a day, you'll get done with plenty of time to spare. Go watch an episode right now.
I really got to get on it.
And those first 8 episodes of the first 8 minutes of season 2 have premiered. They dropped it on Christmas Eve, actually. And,
I heard that. Have you watched it?
We did. I did, and covered it at the podcast. Actually, I put out an episode where I broke down the first 8 minutes. They just show a little bit, nothing too crazy, but it is fun to be back in the world. But yeah, if anybody's curious about that, I did replay Sona and my first conversation about the first 2 episodes of season 1, Sona, all the way back when we were just babies 3 years ago. When we had babies at the house. No, not babies, but they were much smaller back then. Much smaller.
Yeah.
Our babies forever.
I always say, you'll always be my baby. And he gets so annoyed at me.
Exactly. I still call her my baby. The geriatric parents that we are.
Truly, truly.
All right. Thanks again for the conversation.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay, bye.